Browns fans, welcome on in to a little bit of a reaction show. We like to do these post game often, but wasn't a game today. We don't have a game this week for the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, they enjoy their bye week, some time away from football. But that also opens the door for the annual Andrew Berry sort of State of the Union press conference that he always holds this time of year, or I guess not this time of year specifically, but during the bye week. And I thought there was enough said that it was worth probably talking about a little bit here. So it's Anthony Moeglin, it's Spencer German. Appreciate you guys jumping in with us as part of your coverage of the Cleveland Browns on Cleveland Browns on SI. Anthony, I don't know how much of the press conference you sort of got to see as the whole. I know you got some of the teasers of things that were said.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll just start with like your overall impressions of Andrew Berry at this media session today.
Well, I had two overarching thoughts on the press conference today. One, it just was such a bummer. He opened it up and he was like, "All right, we're 2-7 at the bye week." And you're like, it is reality. Like you're just waiting to be pinched to be woken up, because I was talking about with a buddy of mine. One of the shows I was listening to today, they were talking about Lamar Jackson in the game that he had played against the Chiefs in week 1. And my brain went back to week 1 and I was like, oh my gosh, we were so excited about this season, and it has been like an unmitigated disaster from start to finish. And while that is frustrating, it's the reality of the situation. And the State of the Union today from Andrew Berry was pretty much everything we've come to learn from him. It was a big old nothing burger, say a lot of things to say nothing at all. And him and Kevin do a good job of doing that. It's more easily accepted when they're 11-6 going to the playoffs. It's harder for us to hear that and be like, dude, just say a real answer when you're 2-7 and there's problems everywhere. But wasn't all that. I guess I wasn't all that surprised that we didn't get too much today from GM Andrew Berry.
Yeah, we know that's how this organization operates. I think the points you make are good ones. My overarching things, other than the Deshaun Watson conversation, which was he was asked a whole bunch of questions, peppered with questions about Deshaun Watson, which we have a clip here for you of a bunch of those kind of spliced together, his answers on different questions about Deshaun, which we will talk about more here in a second. But leaving that out of it for now, I thought the one thing that stood out to me was just that he wasn't willing at this point to answer questions about what the future holds for the team in 2025, which I will say this, I think there's some truth in that. I don't think here in week 10 of the season, they've sat down and had hard hitting conversations about, hey, what's our plan at quarterback next year? I just when you're in the thick of it, I don't imagine these teams are mapping these things out already, because they have a scouting department that's out going to games in the college ranks, scouting these quarterbacks, deciding if one of them is maybe worth drafting, for example, and, figuring out what their game plan is from a draft standpoint in terms of constructing this roster, and maybe free agents that could be out there. There's so much that's going to play out and happen that I don't think they are at a point to really give you a lot of details about what 2025 looks like, which I think is disappointing to fans, and I understand why that's the case, but I do think it probably is the reality of the situation that they just don't have a lot of answers there right now. And so I give Andrew Berry a little bit of grace on that, understanding why, the fans want to hear more about that, but I don't think they're in a place right now to actually give you anything, even though we know he's always going to give you kind of non-answers anyway. I really don't think there's a ton to share there right now on November 6th.
And I would also add too, it was, I guess, refreshing maybe is not the right word, because fans don't want to be refreshed at this point, but they're still about winning. He said his goal is to win football. We have 8 games left. We're going to try to win 8 games. And that's, I guess, a good thing. They're not at least outwardly telling us they're going to throw in the towel. They never would, if they were, in that tank scenario or whatnot. But it is really hard and for these guys to show up to work every day and to do this while their team is playing horribly. But they got to do it. And it's good that it's coming from the top down, that it's hey, we're not throwing this towel in. We're not going to trade everybody. We'll get into this in a little bit. We're not going to just rip it down to the studs and start from square one. It has an element of, hey, we're still going to compete the rest of the way and just put our best foot forward out there to try to just win football games and maybe play spoiler to a team like Pittsburgh or to a team like maybe the Ravens or somebody, Cincinnati for sure, who's going to need to be perfect. And you could be that spoiler team kind of towards the end here.
Well, I know Andrew Berry's excited about what he called 8 more opportunities. I don't know if Browns fans are excited about having to watch 8 more opportunities to see this team play football, but that'll bear itself out here in the coming weeks as they enjoy a bye week away as much as the team probably is. Let's get into Deshaun Watson part of this because as we know, as we have guessed, that was a major point of contention today with Andrew, and he was asked I was going to say a dozen. I don't know if it was actually a dozen questions, but he was asked a number of questions in relation to Deshaun's play this year, how they're evaluating him, especially after the injury. What does his future hold here in Cleveland? I thought he gave an interesting answer there. And I have an overarching takeaway from his commentary or lack thereof on the subject. But let's play this. It's about a 2-minute clip here. This is kind of I strung together a bunch of different answers to different questions that he was asked in relation to Deshaun Watson, starting with his play this year, and then also how they're kind of evaluating him moving forward in his future with the team.
Really, our focus with Deshaun, I would say for any player with a season-ending injury and a major injury, is first and foremost with the recovery, and to make sure that he gets healthy from the Achilles injury. Everything else we'll deal with at a later moment.
Have you assessed how he played though before he got hurt?
Yeah, I would say, more broadly, Tom, we didn't play well. We haven't played well as a team, and we haven't played well as a unit on offense. And I think oftentimes when you don't play well on offense, obviously your starting quarterback and your play caller will get the most criticism. But the reality of it is offense it comes down to organization and synchronization. And, there's just a lot of shared ownership across the different position groups in terms of why we didn't perform.
Do you think the trade for Deshaun Watson was a good one?
Yeah, Jeff, I'm really not in reflection mode. I think that's probably, I remember I got asked this about, Dobbs last year. It's really not really my focus at this point in the year. Our focus is really on finishing out the 2024 season, having the team play at a higher level, and then kind of we'll get to those maybe longer term or big picture reflections at a later moment. Yeah, I'd say this, Mary Kay, like we've always said, all of us were on board. Everyone's on board, and obviously with a big commitment in that regard, that's always going to be the case.
Given the resources that you placed into bringing Deshaun here, from the draft capital to the contract, the way you talked about Deshaun in terms of being a guy that's here for several contracts, given that he's healthy, why can't you commit to him still being the quarterback of the future here?
Yeah, I'd say this, Daniel, our focus again organizationally is on making sure that he gets healthy. The reality of it is with any season-ending injury, there is some uncertainty in terms of the recovery. And so our focus is on making sure that he gets healthy and then we can move from there.
Is there a world in which Deshaun Watson can come back here and play more football for you guys again?
Yeah, I think that's always.
The last answer kind of got cut off there. But basically said, I think that's always a possibility that he could come back and play for the Browns. There was there was one that was missing the question before it. That was, I guess, a bad cut job by me. But he was basically asked about if oh shoot, now I'm drawing a blank on which question it was. He was asked about Deshaun. I know he was asked about if it was a good trade or not, and he said that he's not in evaluation mode. That's what it was. And then he was asked about whose idea it was, if it was his idea, if it was a group idea, and that's where he said it was everybody was on board. That's kind of been the message from the organization. I do think on some level we might get an answer to that question if Andrew Berry is the sole proprietor who gets fired at the end of the season or something like that. If he ends up on the chopping block, that almost feels like it'll signal that they felt like it was more his responsibility than anybody else's because he's the GM / VP of player personnel. And if that's the case, maybe it does fall on his lap. I know, from what I understand, the Haslam's they love Baker Mayfield, so I imagine it took some sort of convincing. But we've also heard reports that the Haslam's were, pushing, let's go get Deshaun Watson because they thought he was a good quarterback. So there's some vagueness there. We might not ever get the full story, but he continues to preach that it was a group effort and something that they all were in agreement on to bring Deshaun Watson here.
Yeah, I think too what you said is spot on. Like we'll know exactly who was the leader of it all. Whoever falls on the sword, right? Whoever
Or if
gets,
nobody falls on the sword, maybe they're like, well, hey, it
yeah.
was all of us. We just got to move on.
Yeah, and that certainly may be the case. But you hinted on something earlier, Spence, that I thought was pretty telling, in those clips. And it's kind of what he didn't say, up until this injury, really. Everyone's been really in lockstep of Deshaun's our starting quarterback, Deshaun's our starting quarterback, Deshaun's our starting quarterback. And then you hear Mary Kay ask the question there at the end of like, hey, why can't you commit to him? Or is there a world where and she kind of gave him an easy way out, right? She gave him the whole the grand big picture, and he's going to take that every time. But he's like, yeah, there's certainly a possibility of it. There's a possibility that I could be the quarterback there next year, right? Like that is just the way. Like she kind of gave him a little bit of an out, but like it would be really, I don't know how they can maneuver their way out of it, and they certainly I think can, but it'd be really really hard to roll him back out there, regardless of what. Jameis does the rest of the way, regardless of, hey, if Shedeur Sanders comes out and is like, and we have the one pick and he's like, I'm not coming to Cleveland or whatever it is, like, it'll be really tough to roll him out because I think the fans have spoken their mind pretty loudly about where they kind of want this thing to go.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think we're pretty adamant talking about how, I don't know how you come back. Like it felt like a point of no return when you have fans cheering for his injury. I don't know how they come back from that. I don't know how you come back from another season-ending injury and try to sell the fans on
that's another
this
thing
time
too,
it's going to work. Like I like that.
Well,
I don't know.
And this is a guy who, we hold on to so much with Deshaun. It's like, all right, he can do this. He was the most accurate. He also was a very athletic quarterback. He just tore his Achilles and did it in a very dramatic way, man. You don't know if he'll ever come back. You don't know if he'll ever be able to run again. We're seeing it with Nick Chubb potentially. Like
we're seeing it with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah,
even though I know Aaron Rodgers is like 10 years older than Deshaun Watson, so it's different, but still.
And you're also seeing it with Kirk Cousins. Like, although Kirk's able to kind of mask it because he's that statue quarterback, stand in the pocket and rip it guy. Deshaun's, we see that. Yeah. Deshaun's not that kind of guy.
They built this offense around his ability to be athletic, and if he's not that player anymore, then what's what are you actually signing up for? I also think everyone's continued to hold out hope that something was going to come or something was going to that play from Houston was going to return. But I also think the bar was lowered. Even this year, there were so many people going into the season like, well, if you can just be a game manager, maybe the Browns can make the playoffs. And it was like, that was never what you got them for. So if you're thinking about even now lowering the bar further and it's like, well, diminishing returns now, well, hey, now if he can just be okay, that's all we need. That was never the point of this. And I do think you've gotten to a point now where you got to think about what are the directions you can go. You brought it up. Like the answer to Mary Kay at the end there was interesting because he leaves the door open as a possibility. And I know fans heard that answer and they were like, God, please, I don't want to do this again. At least some fans said that. Yeah. I think the answer that really stood out though was when he was asked point blank period about why you can't commit to him. And he kept it very vague about there's a lot of things we got to wait to see with the injury situation. But like you said, it was more about what he didn't say. Mm-hmm. They've been so adamant about him being the starter. Kevin Stefanski wasn't budging off of that. And now all of a sudden they have all these different sort of narratives around him and different sort of tentacles of things that are sort of kind of, the part of the Deshaun Watson story now, the fans cheering for him when he was hurt, another injury, all these different, outcomes that I think they would be silly to commit to him at this point. And like we said at the top of the show, I think that evaluation process happens probably once the season officially ends.
Yeah. I mean, you're still, like we said, you're still trying to win football games. We're focused on right now. There's a lot of time after the season to figure all that out and to understand really the landscape of the free agents, understand the landscape of the rookie quarterbacks, but also understand the landscape of who's coming next. What's Arch Manning doing? What does he look like? What do all the next guys look like too? So you don't mortgage the whole future to just go get somebody again, for a second time.
Well, and speaking of mortgaging the whole future, there's been a lot said in recent weeks, especially with the trade deadline having just passed, about the Browns maybe blowing it all up and starting from scratch and going back to what they were in 2016, 2017, where they were just a bad team that was clearly just trying to rebuild through the draft. Barry was asked about that specifically, if he thought the current salary cap situation with all these contracts they have is going to force them to do that. And I thought he gave an interesting answer on sort of, where their thought process is on that idea right now.
So I'd say two things. Like in terms of the long-term planning, again, that's probably a better like postseason discussion. I think one of the beauties of the NFL is it's not like baseball. It's not like basketball where at times you may need these like half decade long, pivots or rebuilds. I think you see it every year, with teams. Just the margins are so thin. And then honestly, with just the way that our sports works with player procurement, I don't think it's not like we're drafting a 16-year-old kid who's, got to play 8 years in the minors before he comes and produces or something along those lines. So, I think generally you don't necessarily have to see those pivots in our sport.
I actually think that's a really sound answer and really pretty well vetted. That's kind of the case that I've been making. I understand why the Deshaun Watson situation feels like it's just been like a dark cloud over this organization and why some fans are kind of leaning into this idea of like, this is all just bad, start all over and blow it all up. But like, and maybe that's not that like crazy of a thought for Cleveland fans because they've already lived through one of those situations. But guys, like look around the league, man. Like there's teams that are good and competitive every year if they have like the right concoction of players and culture and all these different things. I mean, look at the Pittsburgh Steelers right in your own division. We hate talking about them. They're good every year, no matter who their quarterback is. They're always in the playoff picture. The Patriots for a long time under Bill Belichick, like they were the gold standard of this league. Like if you think you have a good coach who's established a good culture, you don't need to just like blow everything up and start all over. And the easiest way, Megs, to like stay competitive and make yourself relevant again in this league is just to draft the right quarterback. And I'm not saying like we know for sure like somebody in this class is going to be the next great thing necessarily, but I think there's some thought process that like they're going to evaluate these guys and decide if they think one of those guys is worth it. And if they get to that conclusion, maybe they draft him and it ends up being the guy. And I understand history tells you this organization hasn't had a good record of drafting quarterbacks. But if that's the route you have to go because you can only afford a rookie quarterback right now, I think it's a fair one. And again, look at a team like the Commanders right now. They drafted the right quarterback and now they're the darlings of the league. Like you don't have to just blow this thing up. You can pivot pretty quickly to still being competitive and get right back in the thick of things, even with sort of an ominous cap situation that the Browns are in.
And truthfully, I think the Steelers are a good model to look at, and so are the Minnesota Vikings. Like we don't have that Justin Jefferson type cat who is a game changer, but they were unsure, and then their rookie quarterback gets injured, and they roll Sam Darnold out there with a good team around him, and they're one of the best teams in the league. Like they're one of the best teams in the NFC. I don't think they're better than Detroit, or potentially they're maybe better than Washington. We'll see, but we're so scarred as Browns fans from 1-31 of like anytime we hear the word rebuild, like we like flinch and like we get a chill up our spine because we're like, oh, here we go again. We have to go through 2 years of no wins and then one win because what's his name? Jamie Meter got his hand on a block kick just on accident on Christmas Eve. And it's like, we're so jolted by that and like truthfully scarred by it as fans. It's like, we can't do this again. I don't think it needs to be that drastic, right? You committed to a quarterback who doesn't have it anymore. And what you could say to all of those is like, where would we be if Jameis Winston started the entire year? I think this team is 5-4, 4-5, somewhere in there. Like, and in the way the AFC is, that's in playoff contention. Like you're in the conversation. This team isn't that far off. They just had the wrong guy playing quarterback, pulling the trigger, and it got him in a huge hole.
And I'm not saying it's going to be easy because, again, these contracts they signed and Andrew Berry's propensity to kick the can down the road with these contracts, that like at some point the toll is going to come due. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to start paying some of these, eating some of this money, and that's going to make life very difficult to sort of build this roster around the team that you already have. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy to navigate if he's the guy that's still here to sort of see it through. But again, like a lot of those problems get fixed if you draft the right quarterback. And there might be multiple paths, but I don't know. Are you a Marvel guy? Do you watch the Marvel movies at all?
I don't know.
Okay. So there's this scene in Avengers, the Endgame, where Doctor Strange holds up like one finger and he's like, there's only like because in the previous movie, he told Tony Stark, like, there's only one outcome that we actually win this whole thing. And if the one outcome is they have to draft the right quarterback, then yeah, like maybe you're holding on to like a hope and a dream here. But if they hit on that quarterback and they hit that one outcome, then like I think there would be a rejuvenated fan base next year who feels really excited about a potential rookie quarterback who you actually can afford because he's on a rookie deal. Again, it's I get it might feel like a long shot, but that is like the easiest outcome to turning this thing around in spades, like super quickly, and getting everybody back on board and moving past the disastrous trade that you made for Deshaun Watson.
Is that the movie with the guy at the end says I'm inevitable, right?
Yeah. Thanos.
Yeah. I may get a little. I'm
nerding out a little bit here. I have my moments, you know.
It's all right.
I can be a Star Wars nerd. I can be a Marvel nerd. Those are like my two big ones.
I was watching Field of Dreams while you were watching Star Wars, so there you go.
I watched Field of Dreams too. It's not like I wasn't watching sports movies here, Megs. Like, come on, man, it's a classic.
Oh no, but you're right, man. You're so right, though. Just get it right, and you saw it with you go back 2 weeks, and the energy in the stadium with Jameis Winston is like this team just wants good football to root for, and whoever can give them good football, it doesn't matter. In this roster, look at it across the board. Like you take 3 of those crappy picks away, let's go back to that first one in the third quarter. Or if the guy tips it up in the air on Saturday and just jumps right to the defender, right in his hands. If that ball is an inch higher, it's a touchdown catch, and you're down 20-10. They had 5 turnovers in the second half. If they win that football game, you're even with all of this madness, you're still in it. Like there's a real blow. You're this close to doing it, and that's why everyone who's saying, "Oh, you should have traded Miles and should have traded David and tear it all down, put it down to the studs, and restart this thing." This team isn't far off. Just get the right guy pulling the trigger, however you got to do it.
Yeah, and like I said, it's going to be a difficult thing to maneuver with the contracts. And I do think there's a fair question in there of like, do you trust Andrew Berry to be the guy picking the quarterback if he got this last one wrong with the Deshaun Watson debacle? I think there's some room for grace because it's not like Andrew Berry's had a lot of first and second round picks to work with. And I get that like his first round pick clearly isn't going to pan out as a great player in Jedrick Wills. His second one is Greg Newsome, and that's his only other one. And Greg Newsome's a good player. I don't know that he's like a first-round talent player necessarily. But like every GM has hits and misses, man. Like everyone looks at John Dorsey. John Dorsey's first draft was great. His second draft, take it or leave it. Like I don't even think there's nobody still on the team from that second draft that he had. Like so again, like this happens around the league. So I when you're picking in the third round and beyond consistently,
hard.
And that's maybe one of the biggest problems is like. They banked on their scouting department and their advanced people to be able to hit on guys in those rounds. When you give up 3 first-round picks, that's what you're banking on. Mm-hmm. And clearly, to this point, they maybe overestimated how good they'd be at hitting on some of these guys, and that hasn't worked out. But again, when those are the picks that you have, and some of that's his doing because he traded those for Deshaun, you gotta, you're not going to hit on a lot of those guys. So whatever they decide at the end of the season, I think. Again, it'll be telling in terms of if Berry were to get fired. If he's still here, I think it's sort of a sign that they believe in the continuity and they're going to try to let him figure this thing out. And maybe finally he gets the quarterback that fit Kevin Stefanski's system best.
Yeah, and I would say just one little quick add to that is like I'm on team keep Andrew Berry for now. Like I know that may not be popular, but that's kind of where I land. And, obviously drafting's really, really hard. Like there's only a couple draft classes throughout all of the NFL that everyone hits on them. The New York Giants is one of them. That's one really, really good draft. The Detroit Lions had a really good draft a couple of years ago, and that helped them elevate their floor of what their team could be. I would say,
by the way, Browns could have had him on St. Brown. Think about that.
Did you know they took Anthony Schwartz? Holy cow. Did you know who got taken one pick before Anthony Schwartz? Look this one up. Nico Collins. It'll break your heart.
You know what? Maybe I'm second guessing if Andrew Berry should be here now. I don't know.
So, but what I will say is this. There have been, while there's been some duds, there have been some good ones. MJ Emerson was a good pick. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, while it took some luck to get him, right? Yeah. He fell for whatever reason. They
Grant Delpit.
Grant Delpit's been great. Cedric Tillman turns out when somebody can throw him the football on time and on target, seems like there's
there
are some pieces. Yes, there's been some misses. Every GM misses.
Maybe DeJuan Jones is going to be something.
Yeah. So there's some good, some bad. So.
Yeah. But again, like if people are questioning that, I think that's fair. And we'll see what the Browns decide at the end of the season if they believe that he's part of the solution to the problem. One last clip here, just real quick. Andrew Berry did talk about the trade deadline yesterday. The move that they made was Zadarius Smith getting traded, and he's also asked specifically about whether or not they entertained a Myles Garrett trade.
So I'd say with the trade deadline, I think you've heard me say that as a general manager that you're constantly balancing the short term and the long term, the present and the future. And in terms of the Zadarius trade, it's I guess it's maybe a little bit like what we talked about with Amari. It's not always about let's say moving on from a vet. And some of those decisions are made with the idea that there are other players on the roster that you do want to see in a more expanded role. Z played a lot of good football for us. We were pleased with him. But every decision that we make, we think is in the best interest of the team. Whether that's short term and long term.
Did you guys get calls on Myles, and did you guys ever consider it?
No.
Pretty to the point at the end there, when he was asked about whether or not they considered trading Myles Garrett. I don't know that that's a surprise. Myles had already talked about the fact that he didn't expect to go anywhere, and he has said multiple times he wants to be a Cleveland Brown for his career. He wants to see this thing through no matter who's here. But hearing the organization sort of say that, and that being Andrew Berry, who sort of speaks for the organization, it just kind of reaffirmed the commitment to the idea that, they had no plans or intentions of trading a generational player that you'll never be able to replace for in any of the upcoming drafts. Like, that's how good of a player Myles Garrett is.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, right? Because he talked about it. You got to balance the present and the future. Myles still has 3 years left on his deal. He's 28 years old. Like, he's not 40. He's not, he's not at the end of his line. He's still got a lot of good football left in him. And yeah, there may come a day where that decision is is a little bit tougher because you're actually going to consider it. But like we talked about, this team is very, very, very close. The day they trade Myles Garrett is the day that you Browns fans get ready for the 0-16, 1-15 rebuild, because that means it's tearing it all down. They're not in that mode.
Yeah. Well, and I also think too, and I know this may be hyperbolic and people would say I'm wrong, given how the Deshaun Watson thing is gone, like, I just think trading Myles Garrett right now with a fan base that I feel like has been as lethargic as it's ever been, given how that's all played out. And again, the fact that they were cheering for this quarterback who's injured on the field a couple weeks ago, you'll never lose the entire fan base. There will always be people ready to support the Cleveland Browns. But I do think like it would just drive a bigger wedge between the fan base and the organization right now. And it would take a lot more mending to get there. They need people that you can feel good about. They need people that you can cheer for. Myles Garrett is absolutely one of the faces of this franchise and not somebody that you want to see ever wear another uniform again. Like, I mean, honestly, Anthony, like, he is the second greatest player in the history of this franchise.
Yes.
It's Jim Brown and him. Like that. Yeah. That's it. Like, point blank period. Nobody's been more like of all the players that have ever been a Cleveland Brown. Those are probably the two most talented players to ever wear this uniform. And I mean, you could say there's other guys that are closer, like on that list or up there, but I think it's like Jim Brown and him are 1 and 2.
Absolutely. He's been everything that you drafted him to be. He got a sack on his very first play as a Brown. He's loved everything about Cleveland. Like, and that's the kind of guy you want. And I think too, more to the point of this team is like, there's guys at every level that are core guys that you don't want to touch, right? It's Myles on the defensive line. It's JOK in the linebacker room. It's Grant Delpit in the secondary. It's Denzel Ward also in the secondary. And on the other side of the ball, it's Nick Chubb, and it is, well, that's part of the problem. Nick Chubb and David Njoku, right? Where it's like a couple guys that are like culture type guys who have been through hell with this team and will, do anything to get them back to winning. Those are the guys you don't touch. Everybody else can be a trade assets or you could deal for different stuff, but don't touch those core guys to keep this team together and the fan base. I think you make a good point there.
Yeah. And if they're going to turn this thing around, they're going to want somebody like Myles Garrett at the forefront of it, I would say, even as he still is in the prime of his career. And that's going to help you maybe escalate that process a little bit quicker or expedite the process, I guess, a little bit faster than what it would be if you really did strip it down to the studs. All right, guys, we've taken enough of your time tonight. We just wanted to reflect a little bit on the Andrew Berry press conference. I thought there were some interesting things there. What did you think about the press conference today? You can let us know in the comments section at Cleveland Browns on SI, the YouTube channel there for you. You can also check out all of our written content. I actually wrote a story with some of those quotes about Andrew Berry's thoughts on Deshaun Watson and what his future holds here in Cleveland. I know we also had a story go up about the Myles Garrett quote and the commitment to one of the all-time great players and the best player on this team right now. All that available to you at si.com/NFL/Browns. And we encourage you to keep on following along with all your Cleveland Browns coverage, even during the bye week. I know it's a week off, but the grind continues for us. We continue to give you content that you're looking for, content that you want in regards to your Cleveland Browns over at Cleveland Browns on SI. For Anthony, I'm Spencer German. We'll talk to you guys again very, very soon.